She's killed a man.
The 24th of November, 1991, London. Inside the high stone walls of Garden Lodge, a silence heavier than death lingers. The man who once made stadiums tremble with his voice, Freddie Mercury, has just taken his final breath. Outside, fans gather in disbelief, lighting candles, singing Bohemian Rhapsody, their voices cracking under the weight of a collective grief. The legend of Queen is gone. But the real Freddie Mercury was never truly known. For decades, he danced in dazzling lights, flaunted costumes of kings, and dared the world to look at him, but never quite into him. His sexuality whispered about in tabloids, his lovers hidden behind closed doors, his vulnerability locked behind a grin and a pair of mirrored sunglasses. "I won't be a rock star, I will be a legend," Freddie once said. But what does it cost to become a legend? He lived like a firework, explosive, blinding, unforgettable. But every firework burns alone and then disappears. Who was Freddie Mercury when the music stopped? Who did he whisper to at night when the crowd was gone? This is not just the story of a singer. It's the story of a man who loved deeply, who feared rejection, who longed to be seen beyond the stage. A boy born in Zanzibar, raised in boarding schools, and thrust into a world that demanded masks long before he chose one. A man who sang about breaking free but only truly did so in the last days of his life. In a rare 1985 interview, when asked about rumours of his sexuality, Freddie smiled. "I am as gay as a daffodil, my dear, playful, deflective, untouchable." But behind the flamboyance was a truth unspoken. He loved men. He feared AIDS. He felt shame. He craved love. And the world, then plagued with ignorance, wasn't ready to hear any of it. This episode will not retell a sanitized legend. It will peel back the velvet curtain. It will listen to the silences between his lyrics. It will walk through the loneliness of fame, the joy of forbidden love, the rage of disease, and the price of hiding. I don't want to be remembered as a tragic figure. I want to be remembered as someone who did it all his own way. He did. But what was his way? Let us begin, not with his death, but with his birth of identity, of music, of love. Let us meet Farrokh Bulsara. Before the world ever knew the name, Freddie Mercury. Before the legend, before the fame, there was Farrokh. Farrokh Bulsara was born on the 5th of September 1946 in Stone Town, Zanzibar, a small island off the coast of East Africa, now part of Tanzania. His parents, Bomi and Jer Bulsara, were Parsis followers of the Zoroastrian faith, deeply rooted in tradition, modesty, and a quiet sense of dignity. His father worked as a cashier for the British Colonial Office, a job that brought both security and distance from his homeland, India. In the warm, spice-scented air of Zanzibar, Farrokh grew up between two worlds, East and West, colonial and native, reserved and expressive. But even in his earliest years, there was something different about him. He wasn't loud, but he drew attention. He wasn't rebellious, but he questioned everything. While other boys rough-housed in the dusty streets, Farrokh listened to records, mimicked singers, and stared into the mirror, not to see himself, but to imagine who he could become. Even as a child, he was dramatic, his mother later recalled. He used to arrange his toys like an audience, then perform for them. At the age of 8, Farrokh was sent to St. Peter's School, a British-style boarding school in Panchgani, India. It was here he adopted the name Freddie, a name his classmates could pronounce more easily, an early sign of the compromises he would make to belong. It was also here he discovered his first true love, music. He studied piano. He formed a school band called the Hectics. He began to copy the vocal styles of Elvis Presley and Little Richard. But as his voice matured, so did a hidden awareness, a whisper in his soul he could not yet name. He felt drawn to beauty, but not in the way his friends did. He didn't chase girls, he admired boys. Their presence stirred something deep, unspoken and terrifying. In the rigid corridors of British boarding schools, there was no room for softness, no vocabulary for queerness, no place for the kind of boy who lingered in front of mirrors and dreamed of velvet. So Freddie masked it. He buried the feelings, channeling them into music, performance, theatricality. Every song he sang, every costume he imagined was a layer of protection, a code, a secret. Behind the flamboyance was fragility. He learned early to hide in plain sight, said a former classmate. You could tell he was different, but no one dared to ask why. Back home in Zanzibar, his family noticed the changes. He was more dramatic, more distant, more Western. His father, traditional and reserved, disapproved of his theatrical dreams. His mother, softer, encouraged his creativity but avoided questions about his personal life. Within the family, emotions were to be managed, not expressed. Then came the revolution. In 1964, political unrest forced the Bulsara family to flee Zanzibar. They moved to England as refugees, settling in Feltham, a working-class suburb of London. Freddie was 17, lost in a new country. His accent mocked, his identity fragmented. He was Indian by blood, Zanzibari by birth, British by passport, and internally something even harder to name. In England, he began to rebuild. He enrolled in art school. He changed his fashion. He embraced London's underground music scene. And yet, he still kept his desires buried. Homosexuality in the UK had only been decriminalised partially in 1967, and the social stigma remained brutal. To be openly gay was to invite violence, rejection, isolation. And for an immigrant boy trying to make it in white, straight, rock and roll, silence was survival. But the hunger to express everything was growing. The boy from Zanzibar, once quiet and careful, was becoming a man who would one day command the world's stages with leather pants, chest-bearing shirts, and a voice that sounded like thunder and silk. But even as Freddie Mercury took form, Farrokh Bulsara, the shy boy with secrets, never quite disappeared. London, late 1962. The air was thick with rebellion. Psychedelic colours flooded Carnaby Street. The Beatles ruled the charts, and students marched in protest against everything old, rigid and polite. Freddie Mercury, now a young art student at Ealing Art College, was in the perfect place at the perfect time to reinvent himself. And he would. He had long outgrown Farrokh. Freddie now rolled easily off his lips, wrapped in a British accent, sharpened by effort. His teeth, those famous teeth, remained prominent, something he was often teased for, but never fixed. He believed they gave him vocal power, Perhaps they were also a metaphor. He would not conform to beauty standards. He would turn flaws into flair. At Ealing, Freddie studied graphic design. He sketched obsessively images of crowns, flames, mystical creatures, all bursting with emotion and androgyny. But it was music that consumed him. He haunted underground clubs, attended every gig he could find, and studied lead singers like they were gods. The way they held a mic, the way they looked into a crowd and made them feel seen. He didn't just want to sing, he wanted to own the stage. His friends remembered him as ambitious, eccentric, and strangely shy. He was quiet until he stepped into the idea of who he wanted to be. One college friend recalled, and then he was electric. But there was a problem. The world of British rock, especially in the 62nd, was not kind to immigrants, nor to anyone who dared stray from masculine norms. Freddie was brown-skinned, effeminate in mannerisms, and unmistakably different. He didn't look like Mick Jagger or David Bowie, yet. He didn't sound like them either. He had opera in his blood. He wanted drama. So he started small. He joined a series of short-lived bands. Ibex, Wreckage, Sour Milk Sea. None of them took off, but each stage was a lesson. Each microphone he touched grew warmer in his hand. He learned what moved people, what bored them. He studied his heroes, Jimi Hendrix, Liza Minnelli, Aretha Franklin, and blended their energies into something uniquely his. He moved into a cramped flat with his then-girlfriend, Mary Austin, a woman who would later become his closest companion and lifelong confidant. While their relationship was romantic at first, even Mary sensed that Freddie's gaze often lingered on men. Still, she stayed. There was something magnetic about him, something that made people feel chosen when he looked their way. He was like no one else. Mary would later say he needed love more than anything but on his terms. Freddie's big break came through chance and confidence. At the time, a local band called Smile, made up of Brian May and Roger Taylor, had just lost their lead singer. Freddie had watched them play before and admired their talent. When the spot opened up, he stepped in not timidly, but like he'd always belonged. He brought more than a voice. He brought vision. He convinced them to experiment with harmonies, theatrics, costume changes. He wanted the band to be more than music. He wanted them to be mythical. Soon, the group rebranded. Freddie designed the logo himself, a royal crest made of zodiac signs, lions, crabs, and fairies. They called themselves Queen, a name that was both bold and, to those in the know, deeply queer. "It's outrageous," Freddie grinned, "but it's regal too. It fits us perfectly. From the beginning, there were whispers." Freddie's mannerisms, his flamboyant outfits, his fondness for makeup and nail polish, none of it escaped notice. Some fans were intrigued. Others were confused. In interviews, Freddie played coy. He was both everywhere and nowhere on the sexuality spectrum, refusing labels, offering winks instead of answers. "I'm as gay as a daffodil, my dear," he once teased. But it's nobody's business. Behind the teasing, though, was a quiet tension. Freddie was now in the public eye. The closet became more complicated. He couldn't afford to be out, not yet. Not when the band was just starting to rise. So he buried his truth deeper and painted his persona louder. Leopard print, high heels, boas, leather, glitter. His image screamed rebellion. His lyrics hinted at secret desires. But to the world, he was simply Freddie Mercury, charismatic, exotic, untouchable. Behind the scenes, he began frequenting gay bars in London, forming connections that were tender, complex, and always cloaked in discretion. His love life existed in shadows. Even those closest to him didn't always know where he went at night or who he was with. But on stage, he was fearless. Freddie didn't just enter showbiz, he shattered it. He didn't just perform, he transformed. By 1973, Queen had signed their first record deal. Their debut album hit the shelves. And Freddie Mercury, the boy who once performed to toy soldiers in his childhood room, was now stepping onto real stages, ready to conquer them all. The mid-1972nd. Rock music was exploding, and Queen was no longer just a band. They were a phenomenon. Their early albums, Queen, 1973, Queen 2, 1974, and Sheer Heart Attack, 1974, garnered attention, but it was A Night at the Opera, 1975, that changed everything. And at the heart of it was a 6-minute epic that defied every rule of radio, Bohemian Rhapsody. A ballad, an opera, a rock anthem. It was madness. It was genius. It was Freddie Mercury. I wanted to do something totally out of the box, Freddie said later. Something that made people go, "What the hell is this?" Critics were puzzled. Executives doubted it would chart, but Freddie insisted. He believed in its theatricality, its layers, its audacity. And when it hit the airwaves, it didn't just rise to the top, it redefined what was possible in popular music. The song spent 9 weeks at #1 in the UK. The video released before the MTV era became iconic. And Freddie? He was now the face of a revolution. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is this man with the lightning voice and the devilish smile? Why does he move like a ballet dancer and sing like an opera star in leather? He became a walking paradox, masculine yet delicate, exotic yet royal, reserved in interviews yet volcanic on stage. His every gesture was a performance. He strutted in skin-tight satin pants, flashed gold jewelry, and sang to audiences like they were lovers. But with the fame came the tension. Inside the band, he was both adored and feared. His perfectionism was legendary. If a harmony was off by a fraction, they'd do it again. If a lyric didn't land, it was rewritten. Freddie demanded magic and usually delivered it. But behind the curtain, the pressure began to mount. He was no longer just a musician. He was Freddie Mercury of Queen, a name that filled stadiums, headlines, and gossip columns. And with that name came a carefully curated image. Publicly, Freddie was portrayed as a flamboyant, eccentric genius, his sexuality never confirmed, always teased. He flirted with ambiguity, dated women, posed with female models, and kept his male lovers out of sight. Even his inner circle was kept at arm's length. Only a few knew the truth, and even fewer were allowed close enough to touch it. Freddie lived 1,000 lives, a road manager once said, but no one ever got the full story, not even the band. Meanwhile, Queen kept rising. Somebody to love, we are the champions. Don't stop me now. Each song an anthem, each performance larger than life. Their concerts were no longer shows, they were ceremonies. Freddie, in crown and cape, ruled his audience like a monarch of sound. And yet, behind the grandeur, something lingered. A look in his eyes, a brief silence in interviews, a sense that even with all the power, he was still hiding, that the man who sang, "I want to break free," hadn't fully done so. At night, After the adoration faded and the lights dimmed, Freddie would retreat, sometimes to parties, sometimes to solitude. He began experimenting with hedonism, drugs, sex, excess, like many rock stars of his era. But for him, it was more than indulgence. It was escape. He once said, "The reason we're successful, darling, is because I cheat. I cheat like hell." Perhaps he was talking about the music, or perhaps about the life he wasn't yet ready to live openly. Still, the world adored him. Magazines called him the wildest man in rock. Critics hailed him as a voice from another universe. And fans, millions of them, followed his every move. But none of them really knew who he loved. None of them truly knew who he feared becoming. None of them knew how much it cost to be queen. Love came quietly, like a backstage whisper. In the whirlwind of stardom, amid roaring crowds and glittering lights, Freddie Mercury, now one of the most recognizable voices on earth, was a man who lived in shadows when it came to love. Because the world wasn't ready, and maybe neither was he. In the early years, there was Mary Austin. She wasn't just a girlfriend, she was his anchor. They met in 1969, two misfits navigating London's creative underground. She worked at a fashion boutique. He was still Farrokh, morphing into Freddie. Their bond was immediate. He called her his common-law wife, and for several years they shared a home, a life, and an intimacy that defied labels. "All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary," Freddie later said. "But it's simply impossible. Mary is my only friend." He proposed to her once with a ring. But as time passed, something shifted. He grew distant, restless. He began exploring gay clubs, first in secret, then more openly with close friends. The realization dawned slowly, painfully. The love he had for Mary was real, but it wasn't romantic anymore. He was gay, or, at the very least, drawn to men in a way he could no longer suppress. When he finally told her, Mary didn't scream. She didn't leave. "It was a relief in a way," she later said, "because it explained so much, but I also knew nothing would be the same." They broke up as lovers, but she remained at the center of his life. He bought her a home, included her in his will, called her his soulmate. In the maze of Freddie's romantic life, Mary was the one constant. But outside of her, things got complicated quickly. The gay scene in 1972nd and 82nd London was both electric and dangerous. Behind closed doors and in underground clubs, Freddie found freedom, brief affairs, anonymous encounters, occasional deeper connections. But love, real love, was harder. He kept his relationship secret, even from bandmates. Lovers came and went, some claimed in interviews to have shared months or years with him, but few had photos, letters, or proof. That's how deeply he guarded his truth. Why the secrecy? Because the music industry, even in the wild 72nd, was still ruled by heteronormativity. Freddie's success relied on mystery, not admission. His flamboyance was acceptable as long as it remained theatrical, not homosexual. To be out was to risk alienation, especially in America, where homophobia ran rampant in conservative media and markets. Even within Queen, the topic was rarely discussed. Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon respected his privacy. They knew, or at least suspected, but no one pushed. Freddie created a wall, and behind that wall was a complex man navigating desire, shame, and survival. "People can be so cruel," he once said. "If I were to come out, I'd be judged for everything I do, on stage and off." So he built a persona instead. He wore leather, but never labels. He strutted like a sex god, but left the question of who he loved open-ended. He'd drop hints, lyrics that spoke of loneliness, songs like "Love of My Life" and "Somebody to Love," but never confirmed what inspired them. The press grew hungry. Tabloids hounded him. Headlines speculated wildly. "Is Freddie Mercury gay?" became a favorite sell. Photographers stalked him outside gay clubs. He refused to answer directly. Sometimes he joked. Sometimes he ignored. Sometimes he got angry. "I'm not going to make life easier for other people by giving them a label to throw at me," he said defiantly. But internally, it wore on him. The double life, the fear of exposure, the knowledge that the very thing that gave him peace, being with a man, could destroy the empire he had built. In the early 1982nd, he began a serious relationship with Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser. Unlike past flings, Jim was quiet, gentle, grounded. They met at a club. Freddie offered him a drink. Jim declined. It intrigued Freddie finally, someone not chasing the legend. Their relationship lasted until Freddie's death, but it remained deeply private. They lived together, traveled together, but Freddie never officially introduced Jim to the world as a partner. Even in death, when he listed beneficiaries in his will, Mary received the house Jim, a smaller share. Yet Jim was there in the final days, holding his hand, bathing him when he could no longer move, lying beside him in silence as the disease took hold. But back in the 1982nd, those final chapters were still a distant storm. For now, Freddie was still fighting to stay ahead of the press and ahead of himself. He poured his anguish into art. Songs like "The Great Pretender," "Save Me," and "Who Wants to Live Forever" spoke volumes. Fans heard them as ballads, but underneath, they were confessions. He masked his truth in metaphor, wrapped heartbreak in harmony, and asked, over and over again, in every lyric, in every scream on stage, "Is this real life? Is this just fantasy?" The pressure to be straight enough for the world, gay enough for himself, and untouchable enough for fame was pulling him apart. He was loved by millions, yet still lonely, admired by critics, yet still hiding, a legend in makeup and leather who couldn't say without fear, "I love him." That silence would grow louder, and one day it would break. But not yet. By the late 1982nd, the rumors had become unbearable. Freddie Mercury, once a god on stage, now moved differently. Thinner, quieter, his energy dimmer. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Was he sick? Was it AIDS? At the time, the AIDS crisis had reached a terrifying peak. It was not just a disease, it was a sentence, a stigma, a scarlet letter. Entire communities were being ravaged. Gay men were dying in silence, abandoned by governments, demonized by the press. And celebrities? They were vanishing. Freddie knew the risk. He'd seen friends fall ill. He'd attended funerals no one spoke of. Still, he kept his diagnosis hidden. He had tested positive for HIV in 1987, but he told almost no one, not his fans, not even all his bandmates. He kept working, kept writing, kept performing for as long as his body would let him. "I don't want people buying our records out of sympathy," he told a close friend. "I don't want to be the poster boy for a virus." But the press would not let it go. Paparazzi camped outside his London home. Tabloids published photos of him looking frail. Wild headlines screamed, "Freddie Mercury dying of AIDS?" Without confirmation, without compassion. They called it a mystery illness. Some outlets went further, blaming his decadent lifestyle, feeding into the cruel narrative that queerness equaled disease. Freddie said nothing. Silence. Once his shield was now a prison. Inside Queen, the atmosphere shifted. Brian May and Roger Taylor began to suspect the truth, but didn't press. They noticed Freddie's stamina waning. Recording sessions were shorter. He needed longer breaks. He could no longer tour. But when he sang, he still gave everything. "Write me stuff," he told them. "I'll sing it now while I still can." In those final years, Queen created some of their most powerful work. Songs like "The Show Must Go On," written by May, but sung by Freddie, became prophetic. "Inside my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on." He recorded it while barely able to walk. He hit the high notes through pain, through medication, through sheer will. No one watching the music video could have guessed that the man in eyeliner and suit was fading before their eyes. Privately, he prepared. He made peace with loved ones. He spent quiet days with Jim Hutton, Mary Austin, his cats whom he called his children. He arranged his will, said what needed to be said, but he still refused to make his illness public until the very end. The 22nd of November, 1991, Freddie called his manager, Jim Beach. He knew time was running out. He was tired of hiding, of protecting others, of the weight of his own mythology. Together, they crafted a statement. It was short, dignified, direct. Following enormous conjecture in the press, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth. I hope everyone will join with me, my doctors and all those worldwide, in the fight against this terrible disease. The statement was released to the public on the 23rd of November, 1991. Just 24 hours later, Freddie Mercury was gone. The world stopped. Fans flooded the gates of Garden Lodge. Radio stations played Bohemian Rhapsody on repeat. Tributes poured in from every continent. People wept for the music, for the loss, and for the silence that had surrounded him. His coming out, if it could be called that, was not a celebration, but a farewell. Yet in that final act of truth, Freddie shattered something greater than stigma. He gave a face to AIDS. He gave a voice to those who had none. And he did it with the same elegance, grace, and defiance that had defined his life. He never asked for sympathy, Jim Hutton later said. He just wanted dignity. Freddie's death marked a turning point in how the world viewed HIV/AIDS. It brought mainstream attention to a crisis ignored for too long. It sparked debates in Parliament. It inspired funding for research. And for many closeted men watching from behind closed doors, it lit a fire to live, to love, to no longer hide. But for Freddie Mercury, there would be no long goodbye, no farewell tour, No final interview. He had lived his life like a comet burning bright, refusing labels, always in motion. He came out in the only way he knew how, on his terms, with his timing, without apology. After the lights faded, silence returned. No more tours, no more interviews. Freddie Mercury, once the fiercest presence on any stage, retreated from public life entirely. The man who once commanded stadiums with a single gesture was now living behind ivy-covered walls at Garden Lodge, his home in Kensington. But this wasn't just physical withdrawal. It was emotional, spiritual. It was the quietest chapter in a life lived loudly. The disease progressed. HIV became AIDS. His body weakened, sight diminished in one eye, movement slowed, immune system shattered. He lost weight rapidly. Walking became difficult. Even climbing the stairs in his own home required assistance. And yet, he kept creating. With the help of his bandmates, he continued recording vocals even when he could barely stand. He'd ask them to write songs, and when they hesitated, he would say, "Get me anything, I'll sing it. I have to sing it while I still can." His voice, though physically strained, still carried power. He recorded Mother Love, the last song he ever sang, in 1991. He never finished the final verse. Brian May later sang it in his place. Even in his final days, he chose art over despair. Emotionally, the weight was heavier. The man who once stood in front of thousands was now confined to his bedroom. He rarely left the house. Visitors were limited to a small, trusted circle. Mary Austin, Jim Hutton, his cats, each with names like Delilah, Goliath, Oscar. Jim later recalled how tender Freddie had become in those moments. No longer the showman, no longer the myth. He'd ask me to sit beside him, hold his hand. Sometimes he'd cry, other times he'd crack a joke, but mostly he just wanted presence, no words, just to not be alone. There was no pity in that home, no despair. Freddie never begged for more time. He never cursed his fate. He accepted it as part of the arc, like an opera reaching its final crescendo. Outside, fans speculated. Paparazzi tried to sneak photos through hedges. Some tabloids even offered money to hospital staff for medical records. But no image of his suffering ever emerged. He had lived his life on his terms, and he would protect his ending the same way. One moment stands out. Shortly before his death, Freddie requested to stop all medical treatment save for pain relief. "I've done all I could," he said softly. "Now I want peace." He wasn't scared of dying. What he feared was forgetting who he was. In the final weeks, he sat with Mary, sorting through personal items. He planned his will meticulously. He left Garden Lodge to Mary, whom he called his true love. He gave Jim Hutton a modest inheritance and ensured his cats would be cared for. There was poetry in it all. A man who had been larger than life, now planning his goodbye like a final performance. No spotlights, no applause, just love, silence, and a quiet dignity. On the 24th of November, 1991, surrounded by those he trusted most, Freddie Mercury passed away. He was 45 years old. Death was not the end. For Freddie Mercury, it became a beginning. The curtain had fallen, but the echo of his voice, the shimmer of his presence, the energy of his truth kept rising. Only months after his death, in 1992, Queen released the album Made in Heaven. It featured some of Freddie's final vocals, fragile yet defiant. Tracks like A Winter's Tale and Mother Love felt like letters from the beyond. Fans cried listening to them. Critics were stunned by the emotion. And for a brief, miraculous moment, Freddie was back singing to us from the other side of the veil. We knew it was sacred, Brian May later said. Everything Freddie sang in those final months had urgency, soul, and an overwhelming beauty. But it wasn't just the music, it was the momentum. In April 1992, Queen and a host of rock legends staged the Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness at Wembley Stadium. Over 72,000 fans packed the arena. Millions more watched worldwide. It was part memorial, part fundraiser, part rebellion against the silence that had shrouded HIV/AIDS for too long. Elton John, David Bowie, George Michael, Annie Lennox, Metallica, Guns N' Roses. They all stood where Freddie once ruled. They all sang for him. And for every life like his, lost too soon. That concert raised millions for AIDS research and awareness. It also birthed the Mercury Phoenix Trust, which continues to fight HIV stigma globally to this day. In death, he became what he never claimed in life, an icon for the queer community. Freddie had never waved a rainbow flag. He never gave interviews about sexuality. He never declared himself as anyone's representative. But in his art, in his flamboyance, in his refusal to explain himself, he carved out space. Space for fluidity. Space for difference. Space for joy in the midst of pain. Young queer people, many of whom were not even born when Freddie died, discovered him decades later and found something electric. A man who made being too much feel just right. A performer who embraced theatricality, sensuality, and contradiction. A soul who lived imperfectly, gloriously, and defiantly. He didn't need to come out, said one LGBTQ+ historian. He just walked in, glitter first, and took the damn spotlight. Freddie's influence can be heard everywhere. In the falsettos of pop stars, in the grandiosity of rock anthems, in the theatrical visuals of artists like Lady Gaga, Adam Lambert, and Harry Styles, in the fearlessness of queer performers who now dare to sing about same-sex love in the open. And yes, Freddie's music is still alive. Bohemian Rhapsody re-entered the charts decades later thanks to movies, covers, and an ever-growing new generation of fans. The 2018 film Bohemian Rhapsody became a global box office hit, earning over $900 million and winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Rami Malek's portrayal of Freddie. But no one could fully capture him, because Freddie Mercury wasn't just a voice, or a performer, or a legend. He was an energy, a contradiction, a firework in human form. He once said, "When I'm dead, I want to be remembered as a musician of some worth and substance." He got so much more than that. Freddie Mercury did not simply change the sound of music. He changed the fabric of cultural identity. Years after his passing, his presence continues to reverberate across continents, generations, and social movements. His legacy is not confined to records or performances, but lives in the way people perceive identity, defiance, creativity, and truth. Freddie Mercury's name has become more than a memory, it has become a symbol. In music, his vocal ability remains unmatched. He possessed an extraordinary range, capable of moving from operatic peaks to rock and roll rawness in the span of a single song. He used his voice not only as an instrument, but as a force of emotion. He did not simply sing, he embodied every lyric. Modern artists often cite him as a foundational influence. Lady Gaga took her stage name from the Queen anthem, Radio Gaga. Adam Lambert, who now tours with Queen, has stated that Freddie was the reason he believed he could be both queer and successful in the mainstream music industry. Brendan Urie, Harry Styles, Sam Smith, and Mika all credit Freddie Mercury for paving the way both artistically and personally. He was, for many of them, the first proof that one could be flamboyant, powerful, vulnerable, and beloved all at once. In his performances, he invented a language of spectacle. He made stadiums feel intimate and made intimacy feel epic. His presence on stage was commanding not through dominance, but through generosity. He gave everything, and audiences returned it in kind. Within the LGBTQ community, his legacy is both profound and complex. He did not identify publicly as a gay man during his lifetime. He never led marches or gave speeches. He resisted categorization, sometimes out of caution, sometimes out of rebellion. But his existence, unapologetic, expressive, and magnetic, offered a kind of representation that was rare and desperately needed during his time. For queer individuals who felt invisible, Freddie was the embodiment of possibility. He refused to be defined by others, and in doing so, helped countless others define themselves. His death, caused by AIDS-related illness, placed a global spotlight on the epidemic at a time when silence and stigma still prevailed. Though he had chosen to keep his illness private until the end, his final act of truth, his public statement confirming his diagnosis, humanized the disease for millions. He gave it a face. He gave it a voice. He gave it dignity. In pop culture, his image has transcended his own time. His crown, his mustache, his stance at the microphone, they have become part of the iconography of music. He appears in murals, fashion editorials, postage stamps, and tribute concerts. His songs remain not only chart-topping anthems, but emotional touchstones in films, parades, and personal moments across the world. The 2018 film Bohemian Rhapsody introduced his story to a new generation, earning widespread acclaim and reviving interest in Queen's music globally. But even as actors portrayed him and writers interpreted his life, the real Freddie Mercury remained just beyond reach, because he was never meant to be confined to a narrative. He was not simply a man, he was a movement. He represented those who live in contradiction, those who are too much for the world, and yet somehow not enough for its categories. He was the immigrant child who became a global idol, the queer man who never said the words but lived the truth, the perfectionist artist who gave voice to both triumph and tragedy. He continues to inspire not because he was flawless, but because he was fearlessly human. The Mercury Phoenix Trust, founded in his memory, continues to raise funds for HIV and AIDS initiatives. His music remains among the most streamed in history. And every time someone dares to live out loud, to wear what they want, love whom they love, or sing like no one is watching, Freddie is present. He lives in the courage of young artists. He lives in the hearts of those who were told they were too different to matter. He lives in every broken rule that became a masterpiece. Freddie Mercury's legacy is not merely remembered, it is still unfolding, still singing, still setting fire to stages across the world in spirit, in sound, in truth. He lived like a meteor, burning through the sky with brilliance, daring and fire. Freddie Mercury did not tiptoe through life. He stormed the stage, he rewrote the rules, he became legend not by asking permission, but by embracing contradiction. He was born as Farrokh Bulsara. He became Freddie Mercury. And somewhere in the tension between those two names, he carved out his truth. He was shy, yet theatrical, private, yet provocative, fragile, yet ferocious. For some, he was too much, too flamboyant, too strange, too queer, too loud. But for those who needed him most, he was just enough, just visible enough, just fearless enough, just real enough to say, through the thunder of his voice, "You can be different and still be magnificent." He never declared himself a hero. He never gave speeches about liberation or labels. And yet, in every performance, he liberated others. In every song, he whispered truths we dared not speak aloud. He taught us that the stage can be sanctuary, that vulnerability can be spectacle, that sometimes the most honest thing we can do is to put on a crown and sing until the pain turns into power. Even in his silence, Freddie Mercury gave us language. Even in his private battles, he left behind courage. Even in his final days, he chose grace over bitterness. What does it mean to be free? Is it the right to shout who you are from rooftops? Or is it the ability to simply live without shame, without explanation, without needing to justify your existence? Perhaps Freddie's greatest act of rebellion was not his music, his costumes, or his stardom. Perhaps it was his refusal to let any one truth define him. He was not only gay, not only a singer, not only a man dying of AIDS. He was all of it, and more. A mosaic, a mystery, a masterpiece. Today, long after his final note has faded, his voice still finds us. In moments of joy, we hear him in celebration. In moments of pain, we hear him in longing. And in moments of doubt, we remember his defiance, his insistence that life, even in its messiness, is worth living out loud. As we close this chapter, we do not say goodbye to Freddie Mercury. We carry him forward in the echo of every stadium anthem, in the glitter on a queer teenager's cheek, in the trembling hands of someone who dares to tell the truth for the first time. No one should have to live in fear of being who they are. No one should have to wait until their final breath to say, "This is me." So let us remember not only what Freddie Mercury gave us, but what he taught us to give ourselves: permission, pride, power, and above all, the freedom to be legendary in our own way.